Hello? Hello?
Yes,
Yes,
hi,
hi,
Kevin.
Kevin. This is.
Hello?
Can you hear
Can
me?
you hear me?
So if you guys can hear me, I'm sorry I don't hear anything on this end.
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you
Sounds
hear
Can you hear
Jerome?
Jerome?
I am working on
people
figuring that out.
Hello?
Testing.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. So this is Jerome. I can hear Sarah, and as long as other people can hear me, I can start this.
Jerome,
Please go ahead.
why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hope. It's a bit unprecedented, and what we're doing at BDO is working with a number of our clients in developing return to work plans right now, and it's probably a topic that a lot of you are also discussing within your own companies. So I'm not going to go through my typical introduction around my background and experience just in the interest of time, but I do have my contact information up on the slide there. We should get a copy of these slides out to everyone afterwards if we hadn't already provided them, but we'll get that to you. So there's my work email and telephone number, and also my LinkedIn address there, and I'd love to connect with any of you if you'd like to do so. So what we're going to do today is just talk through, setting the stage of what's going on, and then really jumping into this idea of, the new normal, the return to work plan, sort of future predictions, and then rounding it out with a couple of areas where, we could support you further if there's a need. So from a setting the stage perspective here, this is all pretty much old news at this point. We've sort of gotten over the shock of the pandemic. And basically everybody is consistent in saying that when we exit this, we are going to be returning to a new normal, not the pre-pandemic normal that we had before we started this. And there's still a lot of disagreement around how the world is going to change when we come out of this. There's also a lot of disagreement on when we're officially going to come out of this. You see the Bloomberg article there talking about Harvard researchers saying social distancing may exist into 2022. And I don't know about you, but I'm just getting my head around the idea that we may have to have some social distancing into 2021. So 2022 is something I don't want to really be looking at right now personally, but that may be the case. But of course, it's not all bad news. We've got some amazing innovation that's happened over the last couple months. Kevin and I were chatting, and I know no one was able to hear us, but we were talking a little bit about how amazing, even with the stockouts that we've experienced with toilet paper and hand sanitizer, how amazing it is that by and large, there's a lot of stuff on the shelves when we go to our local grocery store. Fruits and vegetables to consumer products and prepackaged goods. I mean, by and large, it's all there. I mean, there was a period of time where it was kind of tough to get pasta, but, everything seems to be back on the shelf. It may not be your favorite brand, but, if you want pasta and you want pasta sauce and you want toilet paper, by and large, it's back on the shelves in most areas. We're also seeing a lot of creative firms. And I can't remember which pizza national chain it was, but one of the national pizza chains has put together this whole contactless delivery service where they've got a seal on the pizza box, much like we have when we buy Tylenol, right? There's a seal to show that it's tamper-proof and no one's gotten in there. But they've developed a seal for the pizza box, so it provides comfort to the consumers that pie hasn't been touched from when it was removed from the oven until it was delivered to your door. Other innovations and good deeds that we've seen are around some of the car companies like Ford and General Motors retooling their plants rather quickly to begin producing things like ventilators and other types of health equipment. So, we've seen some good stuff come out of this. And always what's nice is when, companies like Starbucks and others really start to show that we're caring for the employee wellness part of it, the mental health aspects. And so again, a lot of great lessons learned that are coming out of this pandemic. It's not all doom and gloom. The next slide here is an interesting one that I wanted to share with you. And this is from Morgan Stanley Research. And what it shows here is really where we are in the process, sort of on that downward trend of the initial peak of U.S. cases. This is very U.S. specific, if anyone's joining from overseas. But, we're on the downward trend. We've got this projected relative calmness period, that's going to start in June and last through November. And then a potential second wave that could be hitting in the November, December time frame, and really lasting into 2021. And it appears that the end date for that really is wide availability of a vaccine. I've also heard a lot of herd immunity that, of course, would really bring an end to this as well. But it looks like there's a vaccine. There's several that are in development. I think there's a couple that are in phase 2 trials right now, which is amazing. I used to work at Pfizer, so to have a drug go from an initial indication through to phase 2 in just a couple months is just breakneck speed. But we have a couple of these things that are in the works. Now, what I would suggest for our clients at BDO and certainly to you folks in your own companies is, we've got this projected relative quiet period over the summer. And what you want to do during that potential quiet period is really take stock of how you did in an after action report. Understand, what did we put together with duct tape and a shoestring, if we didn't have well-developed crisis management and business continuity plan. This is really the opportunity that you have to implement those and strengthen your resiliency posture. And it's just my opinion, again, this is my personal opinion here, that when we entered into the initial wave of COVID-19, a lot of us were all hit with a ton of bricks. And a lot of us are very forgiving to the customers or the companies that we interact with, either from a consumer B2C perspective or a B2B perspective. I feel that if we do have that potential second wave later this year, people are going to be less forgiving. And the reason is we've got this period to prepare for a second wave. And there's going to be companies that do it really well and minimize the impacts to client service delivery or product delivery. And then there's going to be those that don't do very well. And they're really going to be the ones that are going to struggle through this period. So before I move on from this slide, I will recognize that this is just one set of data points for you that shows a quiet period over the summer. There are certainly other data points and projections out there that don't really show that quiet period. So certainly you'll want to make sure you take a look at what the available information is. But from Morgan Stanley Research, I thought this was a pretty nice graph to share with you. So let's move on here. So I think we should all be rather familiar with the White House guidelines for reopening the economy. I won't go through this one in detail, but again, it's a gating criteria. There's gates that involve passing a downward trajectory in symptoms, in cases, and then also from a hospitalization standpoint, does the hospital have capacity to treat patients? Does it have robust testing available for individuals? So that's what the White House has put together. They've also put together some guidelines for employers. And again, I'm not going to read all of these for you, but there are a number of guidelines in place, from social distancing and face coverings, and from temperature checks to contact tracing. So what I've found is a lot of companies are looking at this really as guidelines, just as the White House has stated it. When you hear what comes from Dr. Fauci, he says, these are guidelines, and from a corporate perspective, you should really look to exceed them and do more than what's being asked. We're also seeing a lot of state and even local at a county or city level guidelines being put in place. So depending on where you operate, I know this is Tech San Diego, but you may represent a company that has, offices in other locations across the United States or California. You really want to understand what's being asked and required of you from both a requirement or even a recommendation standpoint in each of those locations. Again, just a quick recap here. Here's the 3 phases for governors to consider as they reopen their states. I think most states are going to have some sort of partial reopening by the end of this month. And of course, there's those additional gates and phases that we'll get through as we continue to open up the economies in each individual state. The CDC has also put together a bit of guidance for us, and it's really focusing on issues to resolve for a successful reopening. And again, I'm not going to cover all of this here, but I will point out a couple in that middle column that deals with legal and liability issues. And so as you're looking to reopen or build your return to work plans, you really want to take stock of any potential exposures and liabilities to things like workplace requirements, age discrimination, safe environments for your employees, because there's the potential for pitfalls where we're trying to do the right thing and say maybe high-risk individuals shouldn't come to the office, whether that's anybody who's over 50 or somebody who has a pre-existing condition, but we may inadvertently be putting together a discrimination case or exposing ourselves rather to a discrimination case. So it's just a reminder that have legal involved in your discussions as you begin to plan how to re-enter the workplace if you've shut down for a period of time. Okay, so now what we've done is we've talked a little bit about setting the scene. We've talked about what we're seeing from a national and a state level. Now let's talk about that return to work plan for your companies. And what I'm building at both BDO and at my clients, and I'll clarify that, I'm also, in addition to consulting for my clients, I'm also running BDO's crisis management team internally and working with the management committee to make these decisions in-house as well. But what we're advising our clients is really to develop a 3-level plan. And level 1 being very high and strategic in nature. Level 2 really being around objectives of what each of the business units want to accomplish in both a partial opening and then some sort of full reopening when that comes. And then finally, the level 3 is really around the detailed checklist and the things that you need to prepare before, during, and after opening a given office. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into a couple examples for each of those levels. The first example here is level 1, and this gives you that real high-level overview of what the return to work plan looks like. Then, of course, this may look different for different industries, and certainly it may not work as is for everybody. But you're welcome to borrow and learn from this as you develop your own return to work plans. This shows our 3 main stages, and then of course a monitoring stage. So for a lot of us, we're sitting in either the current state, which is a work from home posture, or we're starting to move into a partial reopening. Unless, of course, you work in an area that is an essential service or industry where you may have been in more of a full opening, depending on what your products or services are that you create. But for each of those phases, you really have to understand, what are the objectives of each phase? Is it to maintain cash flow, maintain service to clients, to begin to reoccupy offices, to start to open up to the public if you have retail or some other public open space? And there's a number of indicators that you can leverage to understand and help back up your understanding of which phase that we're in. And of course, there's actions that you'll want to take for each of those. These are the real high-level actions. Again, we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper. One other thing to note here is you've got that decision analysis that you really need to walk through at that management level to make the decision on moving into a subsequent phase. And then finally, sort of separate from the phased reopening, but there to the side is the monitoring and after action reporting phase. And again, this is taking an opportunity to look back, understand what went well, what didn't go so well, where do we have gaps, and take advantage again over the summer months to close those gaps. Also, part of the return to work phase is really asking 3 major questions. Yes, in step 1 there, you see a couple critical information requirements, which really ask certain things like, can we ensure safety, and do we really even need to go back to the office? Certainly, if you're in a consulting or a professional services firm, here at BDO, we by and large are set up to work remotely. It's part of our jobs. We've got our laptops, our remote access. We're used to traveling and doing work from hotels or from home or client site. So for us, this isn't really a difficult decision to continue working remotely. For others, you can't, if you work for an Amazon fulfillment center, you can't fulfill orders from home. If you work for Ford, you can't build cars from home. So, it's a good question to throw up there to have a conversation, why do we need to go back to the office? And certainly it'll be more clear for some industries and companies than others. But really the 3 main questions that you need to walk through are listed in step 2. And they are quite simply, can we do this? And that's really around physical access. Have state and local restrictions been relaxed to a point where we can bring non-essential workers or restart non-essential parts of our business? The next is also under can we do this is really talking with your landlord and building manager. Assuming you don't own your real estate, you want to understand from their perspective, are they putting any restrictions or requirements in place for people to enter the premise? And then finally, we really need to think about things like the supporting infrastructures that a lot of us just took for granted before, but we need to confirm, are there going to be things like security, waste removal, cleaning, all important to me, food, is the cafeteria going to be open in some fashion? All those things that make office life possible or other types of work sites if you're a manufacturer, but that makes it possible. We need to make sure that that's going to be in place in some capacity before we start to reintroduce our employees to the work site. The next major question, big bucket, is should we do this? And this is really getting to the heart of things like health and safety. Are we able to follow the CDC and other state and local guidance, either requirements or recommendations? Are we able to set up our work sites in a way that we can promote social distancing? Are we able to adequately perform contact tracing? If we end up finding somebody who got sick and was in the office, can we figure out what floors they visited or what offices they walked by or who they interacted with, and then take proper steps to inform the individuals that may have come in contact with an infected person that they need to self-quarantine and take necessary steps to protect their health. Now, this next one here under should we do it is around mass transit. And so this certainly applies to certain cities more than others, right? Where some locales, people typically drive their own private cars to the office, park in a parking lot or a garage, and walk into the building. In other places, New York City, of course, being a great example here, many people rely on the use of mass transit. And so to get to the office from your home in the outer areas of New York City may include taking the Long Island Railroad to Penn Station and then switching over to one or more subway cars or lines. So you're sort of commuting to work with 50,000 of your new best friends. And those are things that we really need to consider if we're asking people to come back into the office. Is it safe for them to be in the office, but is it also safe for them to get to the office? Another area where we're really, working through with some of our clients is this understanding of elevators, right? You may have a low, 1, 2, 3-story floor type building where it's easy to take the stairs and not have to worry about elevators. But again, if you're talking about a higher floor building, elevators may be the way that a lot of us get to our floor and to our office. How do we do social distancing in an elevator? But again, things that need to be thought through in the should we do it phase. And of course, the personal protective equipment, do we provide face coverings? Do we provide instructions on how to make them if people don't have it? Do we allow people to bring their own from home? A lot of questions that, again, we need to work through in this area. The final question we have to ask is, how will we do it? And again, this is starting to get to the heart of what a return to work plan looks like. It talks about things like command and control, who's making the decisions to open a site or an office. It talks about the checklists and the discrete tasks that we need to complete, again, before, during, and after the decision is made to open an office. And finally, it's taking into consideration those other things like legal and liability that we talked about. It's taking into consideration human resources topics such as, I don't know about where you live, but here in Massachusetts, where I live, school's been canceled for the rest of the year. And so we need to, take that into consideration if we're going to start to reopen an office and ask people to come back. Do they have, for those that have children, do they have childcare options available to them? And then also high-risk employees. When we start to move into this partial reopening, I'm very careful in speaking with my clients to make it more optional if it's possible. And again, some of us have the luxury of working in industries like professional services where we have the ability to work from home, and we have that option if somebody's high risk or caring for a high risk loved one, or just fears, is a little fearful right now about, coming into the office and commuting. We have that luxury that, we have the ability to work from home. Again, a lot of people don't have that luxury. And again, we need to just make sure we consider that human element side to all of this. This next slide actually talks a little bit more in detail about that. And this is really protecting people and the employee experience. So there's one thing to protecting people, which is very transactional, right? Making sure there's social distancing, make sure that they have face coverings available or directions on how to make them. But then there's also the employee experience side. How do we keep connected in a distributed workforce environment? How do we ensure for people's wellness and their mental health during this period of time? Things like just showing compassion, reducing stigma if somebody was ill and recovered from COVID-19, or if they are high risk or caring for a high risk loved one. So all those things are important to make sure that we continue to maintain or foster, belonging, trust, and that corporate culture virtually. So again, just want to recognize that there's a lot of business decisions in here. But we also need to think about the people decisions as well. The next here, and again, a lot of bullets here. It's really meant for you to have it as an illustration and a resource after this, so you can read through the bullets on your own time. But this is just an example of a level 2 support. So here's all the objectives. Here's all these different business units and functions that you see listed off to the left, and what their objectives are going to be when we do a partial opening and when we do a full opening. Then we move into an example here on slide 14. This is level 3. Now we're starting to get to the checklist and understanding what actually needs to be done by each of the business units, whether they're support functions or if they're on the business side. But here's an example of partial list of facilities and office management. And it just talks through some of the things that they're going to be doing to make sure that they're prepared, again, before, during, and after the decision is made to open an office. Okay, so that is a quick high-level overview of returning to work, what a return to work plan looks like. Now let's talk a little bit about what the new normal may be for all of us. Real quick, I'll point out the graphic I put in there to the right. These are common components of an operational resiliency program. Certainly, operational resilience is defined differently by different companies. It includes different things, but things like crisis management, cyber resilience, the operational side of cybersecurity, IT disaster recovery, business continuity, third-party risk management, insurance, and certainly, of course, pandemic are common components that we would see in an operational resilience program. So again, I'm not going to go through all of these bullets here because I do want to leave some time for questions. But what you see here is some of my predictions are, I think once we come out of this, and I don't mean out of this fully, I mean out of this as in like June, maybe even now you might be experiencing this, but your big customers in whatever industry you happen to be in are likely to be asking more questions around your ability to recover from a disaster, right? Whether it's a pandemic or an earthquake or whatever the next big thing may be. And it used to be that they would ask simple questions like, do you have a business continuity plan? And then it evolved and matured a bit to maybe asking 10 or 20 questions around what you have. When was it last tested? Did management sign off on it? But it's really maturing even more than that now to asking very detailed questions. It's in some cases doing on-site or in this environment virtual, but audits. It is in some cases also requiring joint testing, so they can really prove the ability. And so a lot of my clients that I've recently begun working with, it's because of this that they reached out to BDO. And one client I had, they had an existing customer of theirs, a very large one, and that customer said flat out, if you don't have business continuity and crisis management in place, we're going to leave you and we're going to go do business with somebody else. And then I had another client that their reason for reaching out to me was that they had a large potential customer that was looking to do business with them. But part of the RFP process from that new customer, potential new customer, was attesting to the fact that you have a business continuity crisis management plan. And again, what you're seeing is it's more evolving into the cost of doing business. You have to have this in place if you want to do business with certain companies. Again, I'll let you read through the rest of these here, but in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. So real quick, I'll end with a little bit of what we can do to help you, and then I'll quickly make sure that we've got some time for questions. We certainly can help you in any of this return to work planning and help you work through what steps you may need to take before you start to reintroduce more and more employees to the workplace. We can certainly help with pandemic readiness assessments. This is an area where it quickly cropped up. It's sort of an offshoot of third-party risk management, but in talking to one of my colleagues who runs resiliency at a large international company, he's received 3,000 different questionnaires from their clients asking around their pandemic readiness. In addition, they've sent out 500 questionnaires to their third parties to ensure that they have the proper controls in place to withstand, not just the current, but any future potential second wave pandemic. So there's a lot going on in this area, and we can certainly help consolidate that and provide uniform processes and responses to handling that. And also, of course, on the flip side, protecting you by making sure your critical third parties have what they need to have in place so their disaster does not become yours. The next one here is after action reporting and putting together a program remediation. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, so I won't spend too much time there. And then finally is a risk management accelerator. And this is a great little product that we've developed for our mid-market clients. It's something that is perfect for companies that don't have anything really in place, and they need to quickly, in 4 to 6 weeks, spin up a business continuity crisis management program. We have that. It's a repeatable process, so it's very quick for us to come in, develop everything from policies and procedures to the program, to testing and training of the program. So something that we can certainly discuss with you in more detail if that's of interest to anybody. So I'll leave you right here. This is just a summary of 4 different areas where we can support you if you have any further questions. Obviously, there are plenty more areas we can help you, but I didn't want to overwhelm you with a shotgun approach. I just wanted to give you a couple discrete areas here to leave with you. So I'm going to pause there. I have about 14 or 15 minutes left on my end, and I'd love to answer any questions that you may have.
Jerome, that was a good overview. So some of the questions coming in, one of them talks about as companies reduce their reliance on business travel, will they instead increase their investments in technology to do more remote readings, work from home, et cetera?
Yeah, so I think you're going to see that we were all forced into this, right? So we had to make do in how are we going to interact. From a consulting perspective, a lot of what I do is, interacting with people face to face, flying out to meet with a prospective client or working on site. A lot of us got used to working remotely, working with video and seeing each other in this type of environment. Now, the technology has been around for a while. It's not like, this idea of video conferencing is new. It's just that we've gotten more comfortable with it. We're also exploring areas where we do things like a virtual audit or a virtual walkthrough of a site. We may see more of that in the future. I think, I was talking to one of my friends. She's retired, but she takes care of her mother, who's in her 90s. My friend, switched over to, I think it was CVS, but it was online prescription refill, right? Something that she probably never would have done before because we're just used to, driving to the pharmacy and waiting for a little bit and getting a prescription. But she loved the idea that she set it up on the internet. Medicine comes to her, doesn't have to, saves a trip to the store. I think a lot of people are going to, who never would have experienced that or taken the plunge to try it out, we're forced to in this environment. And I think they're going to like it. I think they're going to stick around with those types of technologies, even after we come out of this pandemic.
One of the issues that's also coming up as companies are doing surveying their workplace, and I know you're not a lawyer, so I want to be careful about how I ask this, but we certainly saw this in cybersecurity as companies went in, smaller companies that don't have a general counsel, companies would go in and do penetration testing. Those audits would reside somewhere, and when their issue came up, all of a sudden it's discovery time. Someone pulls something out of a folder and says, "Look, we knew you had 10 vulnerabilities and you only fixed 3 of them." How are companies handling that liability issues if you're doing these surveys and audits of your workplace and you're doing these workplace plans, and maybe you're not doing every single thing that your crisis management plan had suggested? Maybe you're not putting up 10-foot walls and some of these other things, and someone gets sick and there's a liability issue there. How are companies kind of handling those surveys and those workplace audits?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, you're right. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak from a legal perspective here. But what I can talk about is I think you're going to see a seismic shift in how management and executives handle risk. They are going to pay far closer attention to those types of findings now going forward than they may have in the past. You're seeing that shift over the last couple of years with financial services, and really driven because they have the Federal Reserve Bank as a regulator and really implementing strict requirements around controls and 3 lines of defense, which is internal controls at the business unit level, compliance, and others, program owners, and then of course audit as the 3rd line of defense for those that aren't familiar with that term. And I also think you're going to see companies using risk in their decisions. And the example that I did have in my future prediction slide, which I didn't mention at the time, was this idea of outsourcing to other countries. Either it's the manufacturing for finished products or components, or whether it's outsourcing of services like a lot of banks and financial services use India, and they have a lot of back office accounting staff over there. I really think that again, executives and management is going to be looking at those decisions now, not only from a cost perspective, but also from a risk and resiliency lens. So I think that's really where you're going to see that people are going to be a lot more serious about what to do with these findings when they're presented and working through them, and making sure they just don't fall into the cracks like unfortunately sometimes they do from time to time.
I'm looking for some other questions. So while we're waiting for some, one of the issues that comes up is it's for employees about when to return to work, and it's really not going to be a one size fit all. You pointed a couple of things about what do they do with their kids, right? That's a big issue for the innovation economy. Is schools aren't open, but there's no camps, there's no place to send the kids while we're working, right? And so certainly that's an issue. And some people see it as only a socioeconomic issue, and it's not. It's no matter how much money or economic class you're in, if your kids are in the house, it's still tough to get work done if there's nothing open. Or there may be someone who doesn't want to return to work because they're taking care of elderly parents, right? And they don't want to expose them. And so I can see, again, you're not a lawyer, I'm not going to ask you, but it is a risk question. There's really doesn't seem to be a one size fit all solution to returning to work. It looks like it's just going to be, customized per company.
Yeah, you're right. And that's why, I showed you one example of what a return to work plan looks like, at least at a high level. And, as you start to work through some of those decisions around, especially the phase opening, right? Not our partial opening, I should say, not the full opening, which could happen maybe in 2021 when we start to, require people to come back to work. But, during this partial opening, to the extent possible, we should really be using words like, letting or allowing employees to come back to work if they want, or letting them know the office is open if they care to come in. Again, this is dependent on the type of job you're doing. You can't be a grocer or a checkout person or, again, Amazon fulfillment person from home. But for those of us that do have that luxury, really think about it from the human side. Give people options for those that want to come back, that they have some parameters outlined for them of what's expected if they do come to the office. And then for those that, need accommodations, that we continue to make sure that those are available. And a lot of companies in their HR policies already have a way to work through accommodations. So in that sense, there may be a lot of good stuff already in place at a company that we can leverage for providing accommodations here during the pandemic.
So there was a question on here that was asked also about commuting. So there may be, let me go ahead and read off this question. Regarding communities, I read that there may be an increase in employees biking to work. It would make it easier if there were showers at work, bike racks, lockers to secure bikes. Have you heard of this yet? And I think that really begs the question is, how is the workplace going to be changed, right? Because I think, that's just one example of how, maybe there's not a group place to eat, right? There may not be a cafeteria, as you mentioned. So how is this going to change what the workplace looks like, do you think?
Yeah, the great question. We covered a little bit of this, not that particular example, but when I talked about, can we open up, right? And I said, what about that support stuff that we're used to, right? From a security, a cleaning, from a cafeteria food perspective. But your one of our participants did bring up a good point around, bikes, right? So if people are going to start biking to work, we need to start to, think through that with facilities or procurement, whoever needs to be involved. Do we want to, maybe buy a bunch of new bike racks if we have the space to do so. Do we want to, again, like you said, are there showers on site? Some companies have it already. How are you going to safely allow people to use them, right, in this pandemic environment, in between, each individual who goes in to use it, right? What kind of cleaning and precautionary measures will you have in place? But again, I think the viewers here are asking the right questions. It's trying to figure out at your company, how are we going to tackle that? Is that something that your company wants to go and make the investment for another couple dozen bike racks, or not, or installing shower facilities? But great questions.
So one of the things you talked about is the crisis management team, right? So a question on who should you include in that, and then you broke that out and you said, but the executive team should make the decisions, right? And so that really begs the question. If you're in executive management and you have a crisis management team and they're trying to keep everyone as safe as possible and their recommendations aren't really realistic, that would seem to put the executive team in a really tough position. How does that get resolved?
Well, the best answer is that you avoid those issues up front. And I know it doesn't get to the heart of your question there, but when you look at the makeup of an executive team or a crisis management team, and again, if you're a small company, you don't necessarily have to have these different layers of bureaucracy, right? If you're a big national or international company, you probably do have a crisis management team and then some sort of executive or management committee that sits over it. But for the purpose of, let's say you're a big company, you've got your crisis management team really needs to make sure that any business leaders are have some sort of representation. And then also you want to make sure from a support function staff, you've got HR, communications, legal, facilities, IT, those people who can step in and put their hand up, especially legal. And again, I work with a lot of these individuals in the different crisis teams that I'm managing in-house and with my clients. They're able to put their hand up and insert themselves and say, we can't make that decision, or we can't say this, or we can't, go down that path. So to the extent possible, you really want to make sure that you've got the right people at the table. So as you're making these important decisions, you're sort of resolving these issues before you get too far down the road. And of course, there's so many different recommendations and regulations out there at the state, county, and city level, that we need to make sure that there's some sort of a regulatory book of record, if you will. It doesn't have to be fancy. It's a fancy word, but it could just be an Excel spreadsheet, right? That I've got an office in Alameda County, and here are the things from the county level, from the state level that I need to think about. But make sure you understand what's expected of you, get the right people to the table, and try to resolve these questions up front.
So, Jerome, it looks like BDO has done a lot of work on this. We have some companies, and in fact, this is a question. We are having clients asked to completely outsource their return to work strategy, implementation, and execute on site. Is that something that BDO does? Are there other companies that do that? If somebody just wants to throw it over the fence and say, look, we want to focus on, our core business, we really need some help on this, what resources are out there for them?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're doing with our clients right now. We are working with several clients and building their return to work plan. I showed you a little taste of what that looks like. If people on the phone, want to take what I've given them to start to build their own, that's great, and you're welcome to do so. And that's why I wanted to give you more than just a presentation. I wanted to give you a little bit of a reference point that you could utilize. But absolutely, we can, and we'd love to work with you in helping to develop that if that's something where you want some external support on.
And we know the local BDO team is very active in the community. Lee Duran is on our board of directors. Do we go through the local office, or should we be going through you for that?
You can go through either. So if you want to work through Lee and he can get me involved, or I gave you my contact information at the beginning of the slide deck, and we'll get this deck out to you. But either way, we'll make sure that the right people are involved from both the local and the subject matter experts.
I was looking to see if there were any more questions before we start to finish this up. I don't see any new questions. Do you think there's anything, Jerome, we're missing on this that we haven't talked about?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, I would just leave with everyone that, we're sort of in uncharted territory here. The data points that are out there may not be what we actually experience. So make sure that your plans are not overly prescriptive, that you've got the ability to adjust them as new information becomes available. There can be hotspots that flare up in certain cities or counties. Things are subject to change. And I think just, make sure you prioritize, health and safety above everything else. Make sure that you've got a safe environment for your employees to return to and your customers if you have some retail before you even open those doors.
And I think that's really been striking. I received some press calls and media calls about how the Tech San Diego innovation economy is doing and what's on the CEO's mind. And all the reporters want to direct it towards, how's the revenue and and what I'm hearing from executives is they truly are caring about their workers, right? And they obviously have a selfish reason for that, but it's also a very human reason, right? And so that's usually the first thing they talk about is how their employees are doing, how they're going to get them back to work, keep them safe. And so that's certainly at the top of mind for at least the executives that I'm talking to. Jerome, this webcast webinar is going to be recorded, but would you be able to send us just a slide deck as well and make sure that your contact information is on that? And we'll post that on our COVID resource page. We've been directing people to your resource page as well at BDO. That's proved to be a really good source of information for the tech community here. So we'll continue to do that. And with that said, we'll go ahead and end this webinar. Jerome, thank you very much for joining us from Boston. And the next time you're in San Diego, let's get by and I'll buy you a beer.
I love it. It's one of my favorite places in the world. So I'd love to come out there, and thanks so much for having me today.
All right, thank you. I don't know, Sarah, if you're there, if you go ahead and we're going to go ahead and end this webcast again. If you